lesson plan for teaching, I choose the short story of Shirley Jackson, which is The Lottery. It is in third quarter lesson plan in English 10. The objectives of my lesson plan is to understand how the narrator guides readers' interpretation of the story and to discuss how traditions are preserved and modified through the passage of time, and to evaluate the depth of personal relationship in the face of uncertain tragedy. And in the content, the topic is short story The Lottery and references Journey Through Anglo-American Literature Learner's Manual. For the procedures, I have prepared some pre-class activity wherein the students read the story twice and record any differences that they notice between the first and second reading. With a story like this, knowing the ending before can change the interpretation of seemingly minor plot points. One example is the description of children stacking rocks at the beginning of the story. It reads like a harmless game the first time through, but becomes much sinister during the second reading because one knows that these rocks will be used for the stoning. By having students read the story twice, the teacher can encourage students to pick up on the differences and appreciate Jackson's clever use of foreshadowing. The teacher can ask them to report a few key ideas from the conversation to the class. However, the teacher should be mindful of not having students repeat themselves, so they could assign different questions to different groups or try activity when students seem to have a variety of options. Inheritance of the Lottery. It is lecture-based with close reading of passages guided by the teacher, and it will consume about 25 minutes. Part of Ritual's terror is that no one knows the origin. The villagers don't know why they have to kill a member of their community each year, and no one questions the necessity of either. They just do it because it is something that's always happened, and this mindless continuation of tradition rather than the rituals itself. It perhaps the most horrifying aspect of the story. How does this kind of socialization happen? What techniques does the villagers use to ensure people's conformity? However, it is important to note that the previous bullet points are the only ways to interpret the code. As a result, while the teachers can present them to the class as different ways of understanding the passage, they should also encourage students to develop their own thoughts about the villagers' rationalization of the lottery. This could look like a class debate or a teacher-guided discussion. The question below are designs. The questions are designed to facilitate the process of close reading, helping students to think about narrative choices and evaluate their own reaction to the story. In Activity 2, the class debate and teacher-guided discussion. The questions below are designed to facilitate this process of close reading. Number 1. How is Old Man Warner characterized in this passage? What words or phrases stand out to you? Number 2. Why use dialogue here instead of narrating Old Man Warner's thoughts to the reader? When would one use the former and when would one use the latter? Number 3. Why do you think the narrator chose to have Old Man Warner address the news of another village stopping the lottery? Would this passage felt different if another character had responded instead? And number 4. What reason does Old Man Warner give to justify the lottery existence? Do they sound reasonable to you? Why or why not? In number what do you make of the sentence "the lottery in June, corn heavy soon"? How convinced are you of the lottery necessity after reading this? And the B. Some students might put too much belief in this phrase and think that the villagers actually do know the rationale behind the lottery. As a result, it may be helpful to focus on the fact that it is praised as generalized proverb. There is a little explanation for how this proverb came about. So, it is a tenuous explanation for the lottery at best. The last one, number 5. Does this passage change your feeling about the lottery? Is it more understandable that you know how the villagers rationalize its existence, or is it even harder to believe? Codification of the lottery, also lecture based with close reading of passages, 25 minutes will do. I have here the importance between free indirect and narration. Free indirect and narration and indirect. Narration to student, especially if the lottery is the first time this concept has been discussed. The difference is explained below. Indirect narration, quotation of one individual without use of quotation marks of speakers, like he said or she said. Free indirect narration also does not use quotation speaker tags but borrows the language of many individuals who do not necessarily have to be named. Free indirect narration can also borrow the voices of an entire group either to reinforce or criticize their collective mentality. In analysis with both of these techniques, it is sometimes difficult to distinguish whether the words on the page on the narrators are the characters, so the students can ask themselves the following question to help them decide. Number 1 question, does this sound like the narrator? why or why not? Number 2, if it doesn't sound like the narrator, who could it be? Are they quoting a single individual or more of a group mentality? A good way to answer the question is to look at who the narrator has talked about in nearby sentences. If the narrator focused on a specific character earlier, then they are usually indirect quoting. If they use more general words like people and others, like the narrator does in this case, they are likely using free indirect. However, this is more of a general rule of thumb rather than a full safe way to differentiate. Number 3, why do you think the narrator switch voices? What purpose does it serve? Students can use this question to help understand why Mr. Summers was very good. It is an example of free indirect and discuss how the shift in a narrative voice affect the of the passage. Can people build relationship in a society? No. Community members' relationship with each other, discussion about 15 minutes, and after that, they need to interpret 2 pictures. And can people build genuine relationship in a society where they don't know who they have to deal next? The teacher can post images, 2 images, and ask students why they thought Miss De La Cruz chose such a heavy stone. Did she do it because she wanted to inflict the most pain or because she wanted to end her friend's misery? That is the 2 questions. But there is no right answer to this question. But the student should give a reason for why they think one way or another in order to practice evidence-based in order to practice building evidence-based arguments. This exercise can also help them understand the rule of ambiguity in literature and realize that sometimes not knowing an answer can be more knowing one. And for the input, potential evidence to support the first interpretation, picking up a large stone as an act of cruelty. While the narrator does show us friendly conversation between the 2 women, it consists only of superficial greetings and cannot be viewed as evidence for any deeper connection. And the phrase, hurry up, might actually mean, hurry up so that we can stone Mrs. Hutchinson before she's already dead. Potential evidence to support the second interpretation, picking up a large stone as an act of mercy. The narrator shows the readers that the 2 women are friends, so there is a reason to believe that they will look out for each other. And the phrase, hurry up, could also mean, hurry up so that we can put Mrs. Hutchinson out of her pain as soon as possible. The assignment, how much do tradition affects our lives? In essay form. My reflection on the lottery lesson plan, I I wanted students to come to class having read the lottery twice for two reasons. First, I wanted them to see how different their interpretation of the story could be if they already knew the ending. For example, the image of children stacking stone and the initial conversation between Mrs. Hutchinson and Mrs. De La Cruz seems like unimportant details during the first reading, but become horrifying important once one knows the ending twist. Second, I wanted them to think about how the narrator builds suspense throughout the story. I remember racing through the story the first time I read because I desperately wanted to know the ending, so students will likely have the emotional leisure necessary to notice narrative techniques if they read the story twice. I then choose to start the class with small group discussion because a narrative like the lottery is an unsettling one. When I finished the reading, the story, I wanted to talk about it with someone and deal with the terror together. Not my own. Other students probably had the same reaction. So I thought it would be useful to create a space where people could share their initial reaction to the story and start thinking about the story's structure. Afterwards, I decided to transition into more lecture-based format so that the student could learn close reading of the text by example and through practice. I closed the first quote because I thought that it demonstrated both of the power of dialogue and villagers. Rationalization after uh, Rationalization of the lottery, while I choose the second quote because I wanted to show high school students that narration is more than a decision between first, second, and third person. I include the conclusion I reach from this passage so the teacher could have something to draw upon, but also made question for students so they could wrestle with the text themselves. I realized that some students may find close reading of the text intimidating, though, so I wanted to end the lesson with a more open-ended debate-like activity. The fact that there is no right answer may encourage more students to participate in the discussion and help them understand that in certain situations, having strong evidence to support your argument is more valuable than the position for which you're arguing. When I was making this lesson plan, I found making good question was particularly difficult. I wanted students to think about how the narrator influenced their interpretation of the text. But I didn't want to ask leading questions that made the answer obvious. I eventually tried to solve the problem by thinking about how I could respond if a teacher asked me that question in class. If I could see myself coming up with more than one well-supportedly answer, I decided to include in my lesson plan. If I could only think of one, my friends who were around me and incorporated their feedback into my lesson plan. Through this process, I learned that teaching requires thinking from multiple perspectives. I have to keep instructor um no, I had to keep instructor in mind when I was writing explanation for my conclusion because I wanted them to understand the reasoning behind my analysis, but also had to consider a student's position when formulating questions, and sometimes, such as when I was picking learning goals and structuring my lesson plan, I had to think about both parties. Would teacher um, would teachers want to cover this material, and would students want to learn it? This required more mental flexibility than I thought it would, and although it was difficult at times, I felt that I now have a better understanding of how information and ideas flow between students and teacher.